It was supposed to be a graceful farewell, a prince stepping aside from a charity he co-founded in memory of his late mother, Princess Diana, with dignity and mutual respect. Instead, Prince Harry's resignation from Sentebale detonated like a scandal grenade. The chairwoman, Dr. Sophie Chanduka, didn't just announce his departure, she accused him of harassment bullying and a calculated campaign to push her out. For a man who has spent years branding himself as the wounded son fighting against cruelty and institutional coldness, the irony could not be sharper. What began as a partnership painted in glossy PR strokes, Harry shaking hands with dignitaries, Chanduka delivering impassioned speeches, both smiling for cameras under banners of hope, rotted beneath the surface. The smiles grew thinner, the photo ops more forced, and the bond once sold as unshakable quietly fractured. According to Chanduka, this wasn't a clash of egos that spiraled by accident. It was a deliberate, drawn-out campaign. She says Harry's goal was simple: eject, her erase, her replace her. And so the fairy tale cracked. What had been introduced to the world as a philanthropic continuation of Diana's legacy is now being rewritten as an ugly boardroom drama, a palace soap opera without the palace. One side tells of exclusion harassment and targeted briefings against her name. The other maintains a princely silence, hoping the noise will fade. But the damage has already been done. The story isn't one of service anymore, it's one of betrayal. The bitterness drips heavier because of who Harry is. This is the same man who has thundered against bullying within the royal household, who framed his royal exit as an escape from relentless harassment. And yet here he stands, accused of orchestrating the very culture he condemned. It's as if the moral high ground he built his post-royal identity upon has collapsed beneath him, leaving nothing but quicksand. Harry didn't simply resign. He was shoved out by the weight of accusations that stain not just his leadership, but his carefully crafted image as Diana's empathetic heir. A prince who once wielded his mother's memory like a shield now finds that very legacy weaponized against him. In the court of public opinion, there is no exit as clean as a resignation letter. The scandal follows you out the door. But the truth didn't stop there. Dr. Chanduka's accusations weren't limited to vague claims of tension. She painted a picture of systematic exclusion, the kind of slow, calculated freeze-out that can make a leader feel invisible inside her own organization. Invitations to board meetings mysteriously stopped arriving. Decisions were made without her input, and then presented as if she had been consulted, and her authority was chipped away, one careful slice at a time, until she no longer resembled the chairwoman of a major charity, but an unwelcome guest at her own table. And while Harry might once have solved disagreements with a conversation, Chanduka insists that wasn't his method. She claims he went strategic, whispering to trustees that her judgment was flawed, positioning her as difficult and ensuring she was quietly left out of the room where it happened. The transition was subtle enough to look accidental from the outside, but brutal enough that she began documenting every incident, every slight, every exclusion, every offhand comment, meant to diminish her, turning her diary into what could one day become courtroom evidence. The irony, of course, is as thick as royal frosting. Harry has spent years railing against leaks and smear campaigns condemning the palace for briefing the press against him and Meghan. Yet here he is accused of authorizing the very thing he claims nearly ruined his life. Chanduka alleges that at one point Harry gave the go-ahead for a damaging story to be planted against her, portraying her as unfit, unstable, and a liability. When it landed, it wasn't some obscure blog piece. It spread through charity networks like wildfire, staining her reputation in the circles that mattered most. The boardroom, once a place of collaboration, had turned into a chessboard. Every meeting was no longer about the children in Lesotho or the HIV programs they championed, but about who controlled the narrative, who controlled the donors, and who controlled the perception of Sentibale itself. Chanduka went from ally to adversary, from partner to problem. And Harry, if her account holds, wasn't the compassionate co-founder fighting for Diana's legacy. He was the man holding the knife, slowly twisting it. The warmth was gone, the communication had thinned, and the air around every meeting grew sharp. Those who once smiled broadly in photos now exchanged glances filled with suspicion. The charity wasn't dying from lack of funds, it was suffocating from internal politics. And in the middle of it all, Harry's image as a victim of bullying began to unravel, replaced by whispers that maybe he wasn't escaping toxicity, maybe he was creating it. The tension only deepened when the accusations moved beyond office politics and into the explosive realm of race, sexism, and misogynoir. Dr. Chanduka, a black woman at the helm of a charity dedicated to African children, wasn't just claiming she'd been sidelined, she was alleging that the culture Harry oversaw was tainted by prejudice. Meetings, she said, weren't just cold. They carried undertones that cut deeper, with whispers about Africans taking over reportedly voiced in boardroom discussions. For an organization built on the language of inclusion and compassion, the hypocrisy was staggering. And here's where the narrative flipped with almost cinematic irony. Harry and Meghan have built their global brand on calling out racism and unconscious bias, painting themselves as victims of a system too archaic and too cruel to accept them. But now, the very charges they had hurled at Buckingham Palace were being leveled at Harry himself, not by tabloids or shadowy courtiers, but by his own colleague. A woman of color accusing him of enabling, if not actively participating, in the same discriminatory behavior he once condemned. It was the ultimate reversal. The race card that had shielded the Sussexes in the past could not be played here without looking hollow. After all, how do you claim victimhood when the accuser looks like the person you once said you were defending? Suddenly, Harry's position as the progressive prince crumbled into something far less flattering, a leader accused of silencing the very voices he claimed to amplify. For the press, this was catnip. Headlines didn't just call it a scandal, they called it hypocrisy in its purest form. Critics who had long accused the couple of moral grandstanding now had a case study handed to them on a silver platter. Supporters, meanwhile, struggled to reconcile the image of Harry as Diana's compassionate son with the image of Harry as a man allegedly briefing against and undermining a black female leader. It wasn't just a workplace dispute anymore, it was a branding implosion. Harry had fought to escape the shadow of the monarchy by painting himself as its most wounded casualty. Now he was being painted as the aggressor. The more Chanduka spoke, the clearer it became that this wasn't just her word against his, it was her lived experience against his carefully curated narrative. And in that clash, the shine of Brand Sussex began to dull. What had once been their weapon, the moral high ground, was suddenly the very stage where they were being dismantled. Meanwhile, in what should have been a victory lap, Harry's polo charity match turned into a stage for further embarrassment. These events are meant to be glossy showcases of unity champagne, toasts, camera flashes, donors mingling under luxury tents, but this one spiraled into what tabloids gleefully christened the bitter polo bust-up. From the moment Harry arrived, the atmosphere felt off. His greetings were stiff, his charm muted, and whispers rippled when he brushed past longtime supporters with little more than a curt nod. Then came the moment that sealed the disaster. In the middle of the match, Harry's competitive streak curdled into aggression. He made a dangerously forceful play that nearly unseated an opposing player, ironically a fundraiser for Sentebale. Gasps echoed from the sidelines. Cameras caught the scowl etched on Harry's face, and instead of checking on the man he'd rattled, he stormed off the field with the kind of sulk you expect from a schoolboy, not a global ambassador. By the time the match ended, the glossy facade had collapsed. The prince skipped the winner's toast, retreated to a private tent, and left donors whispering about whether they'd just witnessed the unraveling of a cause rather than the celebration of one. And the timing could not have been worse. Harry's Netflix polo series, a passion project meant to rebrand him as a modern sportsman, was already being mocked as elitist horse content for the 1%. It was supposed to be polished, aspirational, and inspiring. Instead, it barely registered. Critics shrugged, fans yawned, and the world moved on. Meghan's Netflix lifestyle series fared no better. Early teasers promised glamour and cultural relevance, but when it finally landed, the reviews were tepid. The numbers underwhelming, and even loyal supporters admitted it lacked spark. The Sussex brand, once burning hot with post-royal intrigue, now seemed to flicker. Without the constant drama of palace politics to fuel headlines, their projects were forced to stand on their own merits. And in the cold light of Hollywood, they simply weren't standing tall. The polo fiasco crystallized it. This wasn't just a couple weathering bad press, this was a brand faltering in real time. For the donors and corporate partners watching, the message was clear: if even Harry's signature sport could devolve into chaos, what hope was there for everything else they touched? This was the moment everyone held their breath. Not at a polo match, not in a boardroom, but in the far more dangerous arena of legal scrutiny. Dr. Chanduka, no longer content to fight in whispers, had taken her accusations to the authorities, turning what began as a messy feud into the possibility of a full-scale investigation. That single move changed everything. A public scandal can be spun, a headline can be softened, but once lawyers and regulators enter the picture, every email, every text, every memo suddenly becomes evidence. And for Harry, who has spent years trying to control his narrative, the idea of losing control this spectacularly must feel like drowning in slow motion. If Chanduka's files, her meticulous notes of exclusion, her records of alleged intimidation, her claims of harassment at scale ever see the inside of a courtroom, the fallout won't just be reputational, it will be permanent, etched into legal history. For a couple who built their brand on exposing hidden injustices, the optics are devastating, the accusers becoming the accused, the whistleblowers now the ones accused of silencing a whistleblower. The irony bites harder because of who Chanduka is. A black woman leading an African charity, leveling charges of misogyny, racism, and bullying against a prince who fled the monarchy under the same banners. The progressive Sussex image collapses under the weight of those accusations. They cannot dismiss her as a tabloid fabrication, nor frame her as an anonymous detractor. She has put her name on the record, and once a name is attached, the story sticks. For donors, this is a nightmare scenario. Charities thrive on trust, and once trust is broken, money vanishes. Corporate partners are said to be monitoring closely, which in business speak translates to one more headline and we're gone. Even more chilling, the very children the charity was built to protect may suffer most if funding dries up. That's the cruel twist of scandals like this. The egos of the powerful fracture and the vulnerable pay the price. And yet the Sussexes' problem is bigger than charity politics. Their entire post-royal brand has relied on the moral high ground, the narrative of principled outsiders fighting a cruel system. But if Chanduka's allegations hold, that high ground has collapsed into a sinkhole, for the first time, they cannot cast themselves as victims of an old establishment or a hostile press. This time, the finger points directly at them. Harry once left the royal family to escape drama. But now the drama has followed him across oceans, infiltrated his charity, and threatens to consume the brand he and Meghan built from exile. The story has flipped, the roles reversed, and the world is watching to see whether the Sussexes can claw their way out or whether this is the scandal that finally defines them.